right, we're in Mark chapter 7 just for a moment, and then we're going to slide over to Mark chapter 8. It's good to see everyone this morning. We're still trucking along here in the book of Mark. Like I said before, we're moving slow, but that's okay because we're 3 classes left, and as fast as I move, we may not get through chapter 8. So if we can get through half the book, we're doing good. But we're in chapter 7. Just real quick, we're going to finish it up. As always, any questions or comments, feel free to raise your hand and make those. And as always, I probably don't have the answer to your question, but we'll try and work through it. But we finished up verse 30 of Mark 7 last Sunday, and we're ready for verse 31. And we'll read here verse 31 through 37, and then we'll make some comments real quick. Again, departing from the region of Tyre and Sidon, he came through the midst of the region of Decapolis to the Sea of Galilee. Then they brought to him one who was deaf and had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to put his hand on him. And he took him aside from the multitude and put his fingers in his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. And looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. Immediately his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was loosed, and he spoke plainly. Then he commanded them that they should tell no one, but the more he commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, He has done all things well. He makes both the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. So we realize here that he's still in a Gentile region. Jesus is still here in this region around Tyre and Sidon. He's kind of working his way around the northwest, northeast side of the Sea of Galilee. For those that, kind of a geographical standpoint, he's working his way around the Sea of Galilee here. But he's in Gentile territory. And they brought a deaf mute to him. Now, why he put his fingers in his ears and spat and put his finger on his tongue, I don't know. And I hope you don't ask me a question about why he did that, because I really don't know. And we're going to see more about that here in chapter 8. He's going to do something else that's kind of off, for us today to heal. I mean, Jesus can do whatever he wants to do, basically, and it may just be just a way he used. I mean, we see examples of him putting, mud over someone's eyes. And then in chapter 8, we're going to see about him spitting in someone's eyes to make them to see. So, I mean, he just, some things that Jesus does is a little bit unorthodox. Yes, sir?
Some of his miracles, he wasn't even in the same place.
Yeah. That's exactly right. He didn't even have to be there. So there's all different kinds of ways that Jesus performs his miracles. This is just one of those things here. And that's really all there is to be said about it. But we see that word in verse 35 immediately. Remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about Mark writing to the basically a Roman community and the fast-pacedness of their lives. So immediately he was healed. And then verse 36 that he commanded anyway. And now he's really with the Gentiles. And in a previous chapter he had healed a man, and the man wanted to come with him, but because he was a Gentile, he wouldn't let him come, but told him to stay and tell your friends and your family of the things that happened here today, that you saw here today. And so he's trying not to get, intertwined between the Gentiles and the Jews here. And so I think this is exactly what's happening right here. He's telling them, don't say anything about what's happened here. But he knows. He knows that he can't keep it a secret. I mean, we've talked about it over and over again about his popularity and the news of him spreading. It just can't be stopped. Even though he's trying to prevent it, the best he can, it's still not going to happen. The more widely they proclaimed it, the more he told them no, the more they widely they proclaimed it. That's what it says there in verse 36. It's kind of like when you have a kid and you tell them not to do something, then what's that going to make them want to do? It's going to make them what you told them not to do. They're going to want to do that just that much more, just to see how much they can teeter over the edge. Verse 37, and they were astonished beyond measure, saying, He has done all things well, and He makes both the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. Does anybody have any more comments on this or anything else in chapter 7 before we move on? Okay. Three Sundays on chapter 7. We got her. All right. Okay, chapter 8. Again, we're like we say, we're still here in Gentile territory here. But let's read the first 4 verses, and then we'll make some comments. In those days, the multitude being very great, and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now continued with me 3 days, and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their own houses, they will faint here in the wilderness. So, right here, Christ's compassion stands out. He sees these people. They've been with him 3 days. He's kind of he's reading the people. He's getting a good look at what's going on. He can probably see the hunger on their faces. 1, both spiritually, and 2, right here now, from a physical standpoint. He sees that they're tired. He sees that they're hungry. And he's observant of that. And so that's something for us as Christians. We've got to be able to read people. We've got to be able to see people and see the needs of others that we're intertwined with in our lives. Even folks here at church, folks in our families, folks outside, the people that we know. We've got to be good people readers like Jesus was. We got to be able to read the room and know what's going on. He's very observant of their needs and realizing that they need something to eat. If you turn over to Hebrews chapter 13, to kind of coincide with this, verses 1 through 3 of Hebrews 13, let brotherly love continue. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by doing so, some have unwittingly entertained angels. In verse 3, remember the prisoners as if chained with them, those who are mistreated, since you yourselves are in the body also. So, we have to remember the prisoners, remember others, and see others just as if we were chained with them. How would we want to be treated, if we're in these certain situations? And so that's what it's saying here in these first couple of verses. So the compassion that Jesus has, him being observant of their needs, and how we need to be able to see people and to be able to read people and focus on their needs as well. That we're supposed to be workers in the kingdom. And for us to do that, we've got to be able to understand folks and understand what they need in this life. Any comment on that? All right, verse 4. Then his disciples answered him, how can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? So here we go again. The disciples still not getting it. This isn't the first time that people are hungry and they need feeding. And yet they ask the question, how can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? We're here in the wilderness. We don't have anything. How can we provide food for these people? How are they going to do it, Quentin? No, I'm sorry. The disciples, who are they with? They're with Jesus. And they've forgotten already what had happened previously when he fed the 5,000 about who was going to be able to provide the bread. And so they're questioning everything. We're out here in the wilderness. How are we going to feed these people with bread out here in the wilderness? How are we going to do it? That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Gave thanks, broke them, and gave them to his disciples to set before them, and they set them before the multitude. And they also had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he set them also before them. And so they ate and were filled, and they took up 7 large baskets of leftover fragments. And now those who had eaten were about 4,000, and he sent them away, immediately got into the boat with his disciples, and came to the region of Dalmanutha. So we see here Jesus provides once again. He takes these 7 loaves, and he takes these few fish that they have, and he is able to feed 4,000. Now they have less baskets this time than they did with the 5,000. This is just another instance here for Jesus proving himself to be the creator, right? Out of 7 loaves of bread and a few fish, he's able to create a large meal to provide for thousands of people. And so that shows his power, and that shows him being the creator of all things, for taking something so small and to be able to provide and create enough to feed thousands.
Makes you wonder while they were eating. I mean, we got a buffet bar going on here, and, you know, where did all this come from? How does he do this? How can he, I just wonder sometimes what that conversation was about.
I mean, if you're sitting on the ground and you're just watching and you see that they've got 7 loaves of bread right here, and they got 2 or 3 fish right here, and then Jesus is breaking it apart, and the disciples are breaking it apart, and there's like, well, man, that might feed 10 people, might feed 10, but here we go. It just, he keeps breaking off bread, and it just keeps coming, and it just keeps coming, and it just keeps coming, and like, you're full as a tick, and they got 7 baskets full left over. Like, that's just amazing. I mean, the astonishment that these people have. Yes, Gary?
Think about the culture and how they were drawn to get to in the market.
Yeah.
You know, kind of relate that to some outdoor event we may go to, there'd be tents, food trucks, you know, set up. None of that. None of it.
No, it's just the 7 loaves and a couple of fish, and it's just being passed through the multitudes here. And but you're right. You know, the conversations that's going on. Like, can you believe what's going on right here? Can you believe this? Like, I heard about it. I heard about what had happened with the 5,000, but now I'm seeing it, and it's just amazing.
You know, some of them sitting there eating, getting full. I don't believe it. My belly's not full. I don't believe what he's doing here, but some of them do.
That's right.
Reckon they work for him.
You tell me. No, I don't think they did. I mean, it doesn't say, but that's just tradition, right? All right, verses 11 and 12. As Mike's pointed out here, you know, that they're looking for something. You like, I don't know if I believe this or not, and they're feeding themselves, and I still don't know if I believe, and they're just looking for a sign. This is what these Pharisees here that we're fixing to transition to are looking for. In verse 11 and 12, then the Pharisees came out and began to dispute with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven, testing him. But he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, why does this generation seek a sign? Assuredly I say to you, no sign shall be given to this generation. The Pharisees are seeking a sign here. They may just be seeking more. I think they're just looking for some miraculous thing from heaven, just truly showing that Jesus is who he says he is. They're wanting something major to come from heaven as a sign to them that he is who he says he is, just to try and test him. That's how I see it. But it's just their hard-heartedness here, it really upsets Jesus. It says that he sighs deeply. He's frustrated with them because you think about all that they've seen and heard up until this point, as the Pharisees, and yet they still want to see something more. They need something more. What he's done so far isn't enough for them. And we think about John, about that if we wrote down all the things that Jesus did, that the books couldn't contain all the things. We just have a snippet here of what's going on so far just by what's written down. We're probably missing 90% of everything that's happened so far up to this point. And the signs that Jesus is showing that he is God, he is the Son of God, he is the Messiah, the Pharisees still don't see it. And they're wanting something more. They're wanting something greater. Gary? Yeah. Yeah. And so he's frustrated, and I don't want to take away, Jesus is willing to give signs. He's done so.
What he just did, the feeding of what he did right here,
Yeah.
this was a miracle, and it was from heaven. What do they want?
Yeah. He's done it before. You go back to the Old Testament, and you go back to Gideon. He gave Gideon 3 signs to prove that he was God and he was who he says he was. And then you can go even further, and Thomas said that he wouldn't believe unless he was able to see the scars and put his hand in the scar. And so what does Jesus do? He provides that for Thomas. So all along and throughout the Bible, God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, they provide signs confirming who they say they are. This isn't anything new, but it goes back to the hard-heartedness of these Pharisees' heart. And it goes back to the hard-heartedness of our hearts. And those that are maybe outside the church that just don't see it. It's a heart issue. They haven't opened up their hearts to grasping hold of what Jesus can provide for us. And then that's what we're talking about here. All right. Any other comment? Yeah, Max. All throughout all throughout the Gospels, we see the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees. Any opportunity they can get to try and see if he'll slip up, to see what he's going to do. Maybe he'll slip up on this, or we're going to ask this question, and we're going to stump him, and he's not going to have an answer for it, and that's going to prove to us that he's not who he says he is. He always has an answer, proving who he is. He is going to give them a sign. That's right. They're not going to see the sign. Yeah. All right. Verse 13. And he left them, and getting into the boat again, departed to the other side. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, and they did not have more than one loaf with them in the boat. Then he charged them, saying, Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, It is because we have no bread. So, he's trying to show the contrast here between, we talk about a little leaven leavens the whole lump in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 9. Anything that you can, any little bit that you throw in that can influence you to go astray from what the truth is what Jesus. But here, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Beware of the influence that the Pharisees can have on you, and beware of the influence that Herod can have on you, and get your mindset off of what our purpose is. That's what Jesus is talking about here. When you can substitute leaven for influence, and that's what he's saying here is that we got to take heed to the influence of people in our lives, and that's for us. We got the people that we surround ourselves with, the people that we talk to, and any little thing that they can say to us that can lead us astray, whether it be physically, whether it be spiritually, we've got to make sure that we rid ourselves of anything that's going to change our influence and change our mindset of what we're trying to do in serving God. That's what this is all about. Anybody got anything? I'm ready.
No.
You're going to hold off. You're going to let it boil over a little bit. I got you. I'm with you.
Anytime you see the word, you better take it.
Yeah.
You better listen.
That's right. It's like the word therefore. There's a reason that word therefore is there, because you need to see what it's there for. All right? So, take heed of the influence of people in our lives, both spiritually and physically. Verse 17, but Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, Why do you reason because you have no... Do you not yet perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? That's exactly what we've been talking about the hard-heartedness that the Pharisees had, but now he's talking to his disciples here. Is your heart still hardened? Jesus is frustrated. I mean, he's already frustrated with the Pharisees, and now he's frustrated with his disciples. He's frustrated with the 12 because they're still not getting it. And they're not going to get it. I mean, let's just be honest. If we read ahead and up until, about when the Holy Spirit descends upon them, they don't get it. They're still looking for something from a physical nature rather than a spiritual. But that's what he's trying to get across to them, is that he wants them to get their focus to spiritual things so that he can pick up on so they can pick up on what he's saying, and he don't have to backtrack and go you know, break it down for them one by one, little by little. He wants them to get their minds right so they can understand what he's trying to say and the point that he's trying to make. And verses 18 through 21, having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said to him, 12. Also, when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said, 7. So he said to them, how is it you don't understand? Is Jesus is bread, from a physical standpoint, they're wanting, like, well, we ain't got one loaf of bread. Like, what are we going to do? Is Jesus' problem bread? Jesus' problem, that's not an issue for him. And that's what he's like, get it through your heads here, guys. Like, how is it you don't understand? I fed 5,000. How many baskets do we have left over? We had 12 left over. I just fed 4,000 with 7 loaves. How many baskets do we have left over? 7. Get it. Get it, guys. Like, trying to get across to them. They didn't want to understand. They didn't. Yeah. It's hard-heartedness and a selfishness that we have in ourselves that causes us to be blinded by the signs and the miraculous things that Jesus can do for us in our lives, because we just don't want to see it. Because when we open our eyes and we see it, that means we've got to change. And we don't want to change sometimes because we like the way things are going. You know, my life's good. I got a good job. I'm making good money. I'm able to go do all these things. I do this and I. And we can lose focus of who's providing all that. And I like doing these things. And if I go to the Lord, I'm going to have to change some of these things that I'm doing. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to see that. So that's right. But these disciples here, they're blinded. They're trying to figure it out. They're just not. They're for whatever reason, they're just not getting it. So
let me ask you something. Did they see when Jesus got the bread? Where did bread come from?
well, in the previous chapter with the 5,000, they had 5 loaves, and then they got a fish from a young boy, and then right here they had 7 loaves. They had it. But they just knew but in their minds, hey, well, all we've got 7 loaves. How are we going to feed all these people? They're forgetting who they're with.
I know. I hear you. But I'm just saying, when it come an eye opener or something you looking at it, it's still kind of going to be hard, well, for them to convince, like, wow, what is the man doing?
Well, this is the second time for his disciples. It's the second time. You know, different group of people here, different 4,000. I mean, this is the second time that they've seen him take some bread and feed thousands of people with it. And yet, he's trying to, and I'm going to get to it here in a second about there's a point he's trying to make in all this to get them to understand, to get away from the physical and get to the spiritual. But, Miss Jean? Okay. How many what? Oh. No. Yeah. You know, and we have, and I guess I don't know if I complain or do it, but from a physical standpoint, you go out, if I go out at work and I work on a machine one time and I'm able to fix it, and then I don't work on it for 6 months, but yet my boss expects me to go back out there and be able just to fix it right off the bat. Hey, you've worked on this before, go out and fix it. Well, it's been 6 months since I've tell what it is, But it's going to take me a while to figure it out because, like you're saying, it's not stamped into my brain. If I worked on this same machine for 3 weeks straight on a different problem for 3 weeks, I ought to pretty well know after about a 3-week period how to work that thing and every little nook and cranny about it because I've spent time constantly in it. That's right. Well, it's just like Mike was talking about in the opening remarks this morning about practice. It's just repetition. It takes reps. The only way you're going to get better is to do those reps and work towards it. And so he's having to hammer it down. You know, I can see the frustration because they're seeing, I mean, it goes away from, I think his frustration is not as much about, I mean, yeah, it's about them seeing about a physical bread. They're thinking about physical bread here, but we think about they've been with him from the beginning on every single miracle that has happened so far, and not from healing the deaf and the mute, healing the blind, casting out demons. They themselves have done this up to this point, and yet they're still thinking from a physical mindset, and that's what's frustrating him, and he's trying to get it across to them of what's going on. And I'm going to talk about more about that here in just a second, and how he uses these miracles to try and teach his disciples. And we're here, like right now, like this next miracle is a good example of this. Verses 22 through 26. Then he came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. And he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. And he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up. And he was restored and saw everyone clearly. Then he sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town nor tell anyone in the town. So this is the same kind of instance as in chapter 7 when Jesus heals the deaf mute man, you know, except, you know, he didn't have to stick his fingers in his ears or finger on his tongue. He spits in the man's eyes. He takes him outside the town, spits in his eyes. And again, we don't have to understand why Jesus did this, but he just did it, just like every other miracle he's performed. We don't have to understand. We just got to know he did it. And he has the power to do what he wants to do. Yes, sir.
All right. So my question is, so back then, Jesus performed all those miracles.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's look at prayer.
Prayer?
When we pray here at Westview, when I see come across the website on my phone, you know, so is God still performing miracles then when people get healed?
I believe these miracles during Jesus' time was to get the people in Jesus' time to understand who he was and to believe that he was who he said he was. That's what he did the miracles for. We have everything we need right here. We have everything. You know, he talks about that, you know, blessed are those who believe and yet have not seen. We haven't physically seen Jesus do all the things that he did. But, and to some point, it almost feels like we were kind of, unlucky from the fact that we weren't able to physically see it. But really, we're the lucky ones because we've got everything right here at our fingertips that we can go and we can read and we can learn. And so when we think about, and because we can go and we can read and we can learn, we can realize that our prayer, if we're faithful, is heard by God. Now, if we pray for someone to be healed and, and they become well, is that a miracle? I can't say it's a miracle because, a lot of people are sick and you pray for them to be healed and And over time, they become well. Now, is that God providentially working in our lives? Yeah, I think so. I think that's God's providence and Him being the great physician that He is, and Him providing modern medicine and things of that nature that we can use and that we can take to make us better from our ailments. But I don't, people talk about performing miracles today. I just don't see it. It doesn't seem to be the case.
You know, what people might ask why we had to go back twice, we skipped the times and then we went back.
And I'm fixing to get to that. No, you're good. You're good. But I want to hear what you have to say, and then I want to make a comment about it.
A lot of people want to cheapen what a miracle really was. A miracle in the scripture is something that can't happen without the intervention of God. And Jesus being God. It cannot happen otherwise.
That's right.
So, can God do things, set aside no natural law and all those things? He can. I don't know that He does today,
Yep.
but I don't know that He never does.
I think you're right. I think you're right. What were you going to say, Mike?
I was just gonna say that, it's like you said before, I don't know what the situation, we don't have everything here. I don't know the conversation of this gentleman and the Lord right here. All I know is he spit on his eyes, and he asked him, "Can you see?" And he told him, "I see men walking around like crazy." So he went back and put his hands on his eyes, and then he could see clearly. Why give him what, it's that situation, maybe he's leading this guy to where he wants him to be in this conversation. Maybe he's in the process of teaching him. Maybe he's in the process of increasing his faith. I don't know.
Who is with Jesus when He's performing these miracles? His disciples, right? And that's what I was going to get to. A lot of times the miracle that Jesus performs is a connection to a point that He's trying to get across to His apostles, to His disciples. And so you see what Mike's saying here in verse 24, that his vision's not clear yet. Now, who does that sound like? His disciples. Their vision isn't clear yet on what He's trying to do. And so there's a connection here in a lesson for His disciples. It's a teaching process. That's right. That's what He's trying to get. Like, He spits in the man's eyes. Can you see? I see him again. Okay, now do you see? Well, now he can see. And so from a connection there about Jesus, trying to get it across to His apostles, if you go to, I don't know how much time I got. I ain't got time. I got all the time in the world. John chapter 6. Don't ring that bell yet. They can go longer. This is good stuff. We talk about in John chapter 6, He fed the 5,000. We talk about let's see. I'm trying to get it. I'm sorry. I know everybody's got things to do. But what I'm talking, they're thinking from a physical standpoint, and Jesus is trying to show them that from a heavenly standpoint, a spiritual standpoint, He can provide all they need. Verse 35, and Jesus said to them, the disciples were saying, "Lord, give us this bread always." And Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. But I said to you that you have seen me, and yet you do not believe. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I'll by no means cast out. For I've come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of Him who sent me. This is the will of the Father who sent me, that all He has given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up at the last day. And this is the will of Him who sent me, that everyone who sees the Son of Man and believes in Him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day." So Jesus is trying to get across, I am the bread of life. All right, get away from the physical standpoint. I'm the bread of life. Let me feed you spiritually, and I can get you to where you need to go. And you think about this blind man here. What does Jesus also say? The blind man can't see, and now he can see. Jesus, from a spiritual standpoint, I am the light of the world. All right, I'm the bread of life.